Thank you very much. We had a great day yesterday, and I have brought a stone. I have brought a stone, not to simply tell you retell the story of the logo as to how we got the logo for GDC. And it's a very nice. The story is there on your book, but there is this TED talk by Matt Ridley where I saw this, and he says the earliest man, for instance, if I was a hunter long ago, and if I had to hunt for a tool, then the first tool that I found was a stone axe. And I believe the stone axe is kept in the museums as the first tool that man invented, because I had to hunt and I had to have a stone, and you would see that this stone, I found it in the campus, is sharpened here, and if I had to kill an animal, I would take this and I would kill an animal. That was long ago. And he says, yes, innovation has taken its journey, but the amazing thing about the stone axe is both the stone axe and mouse, and the computer mouse fit into the palm of one's hand. And that's the striking similarity between a stone axe and a mouse. But there's a huge difference too. The difference is the stone axe was made by one single person. Just one single person. Look at this amazing similarity, right? Both in the palm of one hand. This is a great tool for survival, great tool for connecting. But the difference is the stone axe could only be made by one person. If I found the stone, if I was the hunter, I would have to make the stone myself. But the computer mouse, thousands of people make it, right? I should know so many things. I cannot make, nobody in this room can make a computer mouse on his own. And he says that's the beauty of innovation, because it says innovation is both an individual skill and a collaborative skill. And which is why we picked up this story, and that's what you see on the logo. On the left, the blue colored one is the stone axe, and on that you see the mouse, to signify the journey of innovation for us, right? Both individual effort and collective effort, right? So with that very inspiring story, and with an inspiring audience like all of you, I want to start today's proceedings. I'll quickly invite Raj to, yes, Raj, it's all yours, the floor.
All right. I'm going to take the stone and make sure you're awake. Good morning. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's the keynote this morning. My dear friend and colleague, Dr. Steve Tello. Steve has an amazing career at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. We all talk about MOOCs and we talk about online education. Way back, more than 20 years ago, UMass Lowell was one of the first institutions that actually brought education online. When the internet was just getting out there, they were one of the pioneers, and Steve was involved in it right from the start. And along the way, he has progressed through the organization. He was Vice Chancellor for Entrepreneurship, and most recently promoted now to Vice Provost in charge of innovation and workforce development. So he's seen a broad range of innovation. He has taught in entrepreneurship. He has brought innovation to the campus, and he's going to share that story and how they've built this ecosystem at UMass Lowell. So thank you for sharing it.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for the invitation to join you here today. I'm really quite honored to be invited to the inaugural symposium here. I do have a few slides that the gentleman will bring up, and while they're doing that, what I thought I would do this morning is give you a little snapshot of our camp. How many people have heard of Lowell, Massachusetts? A few. So you all know that the American textile industry started in Lowell, Massachusetts, and it was one of the first cities, industrial planned cities in the United States with a canal system with water-powered textiles. So textiles are a very important part of our history. And that's part of the reason that the University of Massachusetts Lowell exists today. And so we'll talk a little bit about what the city of Lowell, I'll talk to you about our university and its roots in that area. And then I want to talk a little bit about our evolution as a university that supports innovation and entrepreneurship in the region. So Lowell is a population of about 120,000. It's a post-industrial city, and basically by that I mean manufacturing left. And that created some real hardship in the 1960s and 1970s. The textile industry boomed. It moved down to southern United States, losing jobs, meaning we had a bunch of derelict mill buildings. And then eventually it went overseas. And then there was a boom in the late 60s and 70s and 80s when the computer industry started to build up in that area. Wang Computer, Digital Equipment Corps, and a number of others, including Desch's own company, which was in the region. But then some of those companies, Wang closed, Digital closed, and once again the city found itself in this position where they were left without major employers, which was a real challenge. And I can keep talking without the slides, so if you all are comfortable, we can do that. Very good. So the key to this location of Lowell, frankly, is the Merrimack River. The Merrimack River flows from northern New Hampshire down through Massachusetts. It goes through several what are now post-industrial cities: Haverhill, Nashua, New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire, Lawrence, Massachusetts. But at Lowell, the Merrimack River drops about 35 feet. And that drop is the reason that they could harness the power. And so they dug a canal system. Lowell has the most canals in a city of anywhere in the United States. And those canals were used to power the mills. So it's it's a beautiful city. It's since bounced back, and we'll talk a little bit about that. In terms of the university, UMass Lowell is a doctoral research university. About $68 million in research expenditures. We're working diligently to grow that. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about our strategic planning process. As I mentioned, our roots are in the textile and the teacher education. So in around 1897, in Lowell, they formed the Lowell Textile Institute. And then about the same time, they also formed Lowell Normal School, which was formed to provide education for the mill workers and their families. And those two institutions existed on different sides of the river, independent of each other, for well over 70 years or so. And then at one point they merged into the University of Lowell, bringing together the Teacher College and the Technology Institute. And as technologies changed, the textile industry faded, electronics and computer industry started to rise. Lowell Textile Institute became Lowell Technological Institute. It broadened its array of offerings to include the sciences, industrial management, and business. At the same time, the Lowell Normal School started to grow into a state college that included the fine arts, humanities, and social sciences. So in the late 1970s, they merged into the University of Lowell, and about 15 years later, they merged into the University of Massachusetts system. So Lowell is one of 5 campuses in the UMass system, and we have 6 professional colleges with a whole array of engineering, science, business, fine arts, community, social science, education programs. They're offered at the undergraduate and at graduate doctoral degree. We've grown a lot, and that's the real story here. In the last 8 years or so, we've grown by about 60%. And this was very planned growth. And keep in mind, this was during the recession. We started our growth when Marty Meehan, who was a congressman, came to the university as a chancellor. And we started our growth path. I'll talk a little bit about that. We're about 18,300 students now, about 12,000 undergraduate students, 3,500 graduate students, and then a very large professional and continuing education unit. And so, as Raj mentioned, my career at the university started in 1996 in continuing education. I was a little peon. They hired me to manage a multimedia certificate program, which was brand new. I spent about 6 months there, and I realized 15 other people thought they ran that program. And so I thought it's time for me to find something else to do. And a friend of mine from UMass Dartmouth taught me how to put courses online using Netscape Gold and a 14K dial-up modem. And I walked into the dean's office, who is Jackie Maloney, who is now chancellor of the university. And I said to her, I said, Jackie, what do you think? Could we try some of this online course activity? And she looked at me, she goes, well, you know, the current chancellor, Bill Hogan, was very invested in two-way interactive television, compressed video, picture-tel, very expensive proposition, $50,000 per classroom, $5,000 a month for bandwidth, and it was still time and place restricted. And I looked at her and I said, well, I know the chancellor's invested that. And then she said, well, do you think we could make money doing it? And I said, well, I'm not sure, Jackie, but I think we may miss the boat. And it was just a hunch. And that program has grown from 6 courses on an old Mac 2 web server sitting in the corner of my office to a program that generates about $50 million in gross revenues. We have about 25,000 annual enrollments in that program. So it really has been a boon to our campus. And I must say, we don't do much two-way interactive TV anymore. The university has a regional economic impact of close to $1 billion, about $921 million. And that's based on looking at the money that we spend, the money that we pay people, as well as our outreach activities, our incubators, our professional education programs, our research agenda. And I'll talk about those in a bit more detail. So you can't tell the new story of UMass Lowell without talking about the strategic planning process. Now, we had strategic planning processes before. I've been there for 21 years now, under different leadership, but they tended to be very select, hand-picked strategic planners, and it wasn't an open process. In, I guess it was 2007, 2008, Marty Meehan became the new chancellor. And the first thing Marty Meehan did was hire the woman next to him. That's Jackie Maloney. And I had known Jackie for about 15 years at the time. Jackie ran the continuing ed operation. She was the dean of University College. She took that from an operation that was running in the red, losing about $2.5 million a year, to one at the time was generating about $10 to $15 million. And they grew that even further. He made Jackie his executive vice chancellor, and together the two of them crafted out a very open planning process, a strategic planning process that engaged somewhere in the vicinity of 350 people from across campus and across our university partners. So it was really a very inclusive process, and allowed us to start to set up a set of strategic pillars and goals for the university. And so these were established 2009, 2010. We did our 10-year plan, 2020, and these 5 pillars are actually reflected on much of the work that we do around campus. And there are faculty and staff managed committees that develop objectives for each of these pillars. There are resources that are dedicated towards advancing the pillars. So we have a pillar on transformational education that looks at how we can continue to provide a high quality education as we grow the university by 60%. We're very focused on creating a globally inclusive culture on campus, which, as many of you know, is a challenge under the current Trump administration, but it's certainly one where my president and my chancellor have been quite outspoken in terms of supporting and inviting our international colleagues and students to campus. The innovative research and entrepreneurship pillar, I will take some responsibility for making sure they put entrepreneurship on research, because it really frustrated me that we would spend so much money on research and we would focus on research expenditures versus the outcomes of research. So what we want to do is see research turned into new products and new businesses and new medications and such. And so we've really worked hard to integrate a commercial and entrepreneurial perspective into our research operation. Leverage Our Legacy in Our Place talks about what this university brings to the region. So we have 50,000 living alumni in Massachusetts from University of Massachusetts Lowell. Since we're very professionally focused, many of these alumni end up in important positions within companies, community organizations, educational institutions across the region. And then we also have a commitment to growing the economy of the region. So that economic impact number, $921 million, that was one of the projects that the committee that serves this Legacy in Our Place pillar worked on, actually trying to document the work that we do and the impact it has in the community. And then entrepreneurial stewardship in higher education looks at how we manage our operations and how we do it in a way that we're covering our costs, generating revenue, and reinvesting that revenue back into the institution. So I mentioned our continuing ed operation through online education generates about $50 million in gross revenue. About $10 million of that is pumped right back into the institution. One of the challenges we face in Massachusetts is a declining state contribution to our operations. So right now the state contributes about 22% of the cost of an undergraduate education and the operation of the facility. So what we need to do is figure out other ways to bring resources into the institution so that we can grow and continue to offer quality education. So this has really shaped the way we think about what we do. These pillars are on placards around the campus. We were inspired, and I have to thank my good friend Raj Melville, who I think it was probably 2011 or 2012, organized a trip out to Arizona State University. And we got out there, Arizona State under the Chancellor had done quite a bit of work as an entrepreneurial institution. And we got there, everywhere you walked, you saw their pillars or their goals mounted on placards around campus. And when I got back into the office the next week, I walked into the Executive Vice Chancellor's office. I said, Jackie, where are our pillars? I just got back from ASU. They're everywhere. And these pillars, it's important to have them up because they consciously and subconsciously remind people that we have a set of values and goals at this institution. So that's sort of a snapshot. And there's another person who came to town about this time who came to the university, and that would be Desh. And I remember Desh coming into town, thank you. And I was still teaching, I was a faculty member at the time in the business school where I started the undergraduate and graduate entrepreneurship programs. And I heard an announcement that the Deshpande Foundation was going to create the Merrimack Valley Center on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So I walked up to my dean's office and I said, excuse me, how come I'm not involved in this? And I can be a little brazen at times, I will admit it. And she looked at me, well, that's being operated by the Chancellor's office. And I said, well, Kathy was her name. I said, don't you think we should be involved in this? And she asked me if I was volunteering. And I said, yep, absolutely. One thing I've learned in life is always raise your hand, right? Always raise your hand. And that has really turned into a fantastic relationship. I learned a lot. I traveled to Hubli 6 years ago as part of this trip. And I learned I remember Desh and Raj talking about scale. And I didn't quite understand why scale was so important until I came here to India. And I looked at the population, and I looked at some of the challenges, and I looked at the work the Deshpande Center for Social Entrepreneurship was doing, and it struck me immediately. I said, okay, now I get it. And so those were lessons that I was able to bring back to Lowell and are reflected, I hope, in the work that we're doing right now. So Desh, I have to thank you for that little spark that you set on our campus. Now, I would be remiss if I did not take a moment to plug the Deshpande Symposium on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Part of that visit to campus back in when we started working with Raj and Desh, they supported, like they are here, setting up a conference. And our first conference was, I think it was 2012. We had probably about 80 people invited from around the country to come to Lowell. Many of them, I would say most of them, had never been to Lowell. Many of them hadn't even heard of Lowell, but it provided an opportunity for us to sort of share a bit what we were doing, but more importantly, to learn from colleagues across North America who were from some of the best institutions and had some of the best entrepreneurship programs in the country. And it was really important. That conference now has grown to about 300 people. I know that some of you have attended in the past, and if you haven't had a chance to attend, I'd urge you to consider it. But it does bring together 300 people from across North America and from other countries, probably about 5 or 6 other countries, including India, who spend 2.5 days examining entrepreneurship in the curriculum, thinking about tech transfer and commercialization, and thinking about how to make their institutions the most entrepreneurial. The call for panel proposals is out, and I would strongly encourage you to consider putting together an international panel for that conference. And certainly my good friend Tom O'Donnell, who has led the charge on this conference along with Raj Melville, would be happy to chat with you more about that. But I also share this because there are turning points in institutions' history, right? There are times in our institutions when we have a chance to make a big difference. And the funny thing about that is you don't always know it. And I call this sort of the unexpected opportunity. Something that you raise your hands, you get involved in something, you don't necessarily realize how big it could be. But there were just a convergence of events with our strategic planning process, our work with the Deshpande Foundation, hosting the conference, developing the entrepreneurship programs. All these things came together at the same time, which really allowed us to sort of jumpstart and really accelerate our development. So what am I talking about here? Let's talk a little bit about innovation ecosystems. And just so we're all on the same page, some level setting, we're talking about a region or area that supports the emergence, development, and commercialization of technology. Because if you commercialize, you create jobs. And ultimately, having impact in an innovation ecosystem means you're translating those innovations into new products, new companies, new services, and new organizations. I often joke with folks, even though I started different entrepreneurship programs, tech entrepreneurship programs, I often joke with folks, I'm not really interested in creating entrepreneurs. I'm much more interested in helping them to create businesses that settle in our region and create jobs for people. And that really is the nexus of economic impact and the importance of an innovation ecosystem. So what are the forces that drive this ecosystem? Ideas, certainly. New discoveries, technology, the work that our basic researchers do, our applied researchers do. That research work is certainly important, right? But ideas alone are insufficient, right? Research alone is insufficient to drive an innovation ecosystem. You need customers. There are problems that people face. Oftentimes, hopefully, research can be driven by addressing and solving those problems. There's opportunities associated with solving those problems. And so thinking about what those problems are, what are the new processes we need, who are the people that are affected by those problems, helps to guide research in a way that can be applied and can result in commercialization benefits. You need resources. You need different types of resources. And the good news is, your institution or your program doesn't have to provide all of the resources. In fact, we've learned a lot about collaborating and partnering with people over the last 10 years. That's really, again, helped accelerate our growth cycle and our impact. You need knowledge resources, you need facility resources, funding resources, and people. And then finally, I think you need focus. The ability to focus energy and move people in a certain direction. And it doesn't mean everyone has to agree and everyone necessarily even has to get along, but you all have to keep moving forward in a direction. So how does UMass Lowell contribute to this innovation ecosystem? So we do it, I've kind of broken it down to 4 ways. We translate research into opportunities, nurturing the startup community so that we can move those opportunities outside the door, building strong and deep corporate partnerships, because our corporate partners are major employers. They're also major investors in some of these technologies and innovations we bring forward. And then developing the next generation workforce. So I thought what I could do here is give you a few examples of how we're doing that. And so we'll start with the industry-focused research. So this is an area where we have, because of our alumni base, particularly in the engineering and sciences, we have a very committed alumni who've moved their way up within different organizations. We have folks working at Boston Scientific, we have folks at Johnson & Johnson, we have folks at Kronos, and those alumni are very important to us in terms of connecting our students and our graduates with employment opportunities, but they're also important in bringing that company back to campus. And what we've done is we've opened up the doors of the campus to the university in a very focused way. We've actually created a preferred partners program that we can market to companies that want a deep engagement. So many of us have sponsored research relationships with companies, but sponsored research can be a very, I would say, very sort of tactical approach to a partnership. I need Professor X's lab to develop this, I'll pay you so much to do it, and then you hand it back. And so that the opportunity for your institution to benefit from that, certainly Professor X gains some funding for his lab, may be able to hire a grad student, there's probably some overhead that helps the research operation, but it may not be a deep relationship. What we've tried to do is move some of our bigger partners into a deeper relationship where we, rather than contracting one-on-one for sponsored research agreements, we'll say to them, listen, we've looked at how much you've spent. You spent $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 a year. Why don't you commit $500,000 over the next 5 years? And it'll be in a pool. And you can use that money, you can draw on that bank. Rather than us negotiating out a contract every time, let's make this simpler. Let's look at the number of students you're hiring. Let's see if we can create up an office on site here where you can meet students. We'll make it easy for you access to students. Let's look at our co-op partnerships. So we've created a co-op program where our students can spend 6 months in a company. So we've put together a package of opportunities, and I think one of the key aspects of that is opening up the core research facilities. So we've invested quite a bit, $85 million in the Saab Emerging Technology Center. It has 3 levels of clean rooms, materials characterization labs, a whole range of facilities. Many of those facilities are on a website, core research facilities. Our partners can go online, they can book it online, they can pay with a credit card, or they can draw against their account. The whole idea is to make it easier for them to use this very valuable resource that frankly is underutilized on campus. And so we put together a package of resources that suddenly makes it attractive to a company like Raytheon, which has hired, I would guess, thousands of our alumni over the years. When we built that core research building, the truth is it's a 4-story building. We only had enough money to build 2 floors out. And so, but we shelved the top 2 floors. We built them, but they were empty. And then we went to our partners at Raytheon. We said, you know what? You work so closely with our researchers, our graduates. Why don't you come to campus? We'll work together with you. We'll create a space on campus where your employees and our researchers can work together in a secure facility. So that's how we helped build out that building. Raytheon made a significant contribution. They committed to a partnership, and their presence is on campus now. And so that's one way to develop those deeper relations. We also build sort of industry collaboratives. The Printed Electronics Research Collaborative is one where we've worked to leverage some federal grant funding to pull together supply chain partners in that area. Another one that I do want to share and move on is in the U.S. there's been this National Network of Manufacturing Initiatives, and these are huge multi-state partnerships, collaborative projects in different areas. And so we've been fortunate enough to become partners in fabrics and textiles, flexible electronics, robotics, photonics, and bio, in 5 of the NNMIs. And one in particular we're very excited about, the fabrics and textiles. We're in a partnership with MIT, and we are building out 2 floors in our innovation building where we will be working on the advanced manufacturing processes required for these new flexible electronics and flexible textiles. And we've also included on the first floor a textile makerspace where you'll have sewing machines and equipment, and it's right on ground level. It's almost going to look like a retail space. And the idea is to help people, when you mention the words advanced manufacturing, people may not quite understand what you mean. But when you show them a piece of fabric that lights up based on the lighting in the room, suddenly it becomes real to them. And so part of it is helping to make that real. So those are just a few examples of how we've done that. When we think about nurturing regional startups, I was thinking about our conversation yesterday when we were talking about entrepreneurship curriculum. And one thing that I realized is sometimes when we talk about entrepreneurship, we're talking about different things, right? We could be talking about raising the awareness of entrepreneurship as an option for an undergraduate student who's never ever thought about it in their life. On the other extreme, we may be talking about making a $5 million investment in an established startup that's doing its round A. And I had realized this a few years ago as I was starting to reorganize our various entrepreneurship efforts on campus. And I realized we needed sort of an organizing vehicle, a way to sort of categorize these different types of activities. So we used something simple, right? Raising awareness, developing skills, and launching products and ventures. So it's one way to think about the different types of activities we have going on, because based on what level a startup is at, they need different types of interventions. They need different levels of support. They need you to talk to them in different ways. I think I shared yesterday, our DifferenceMaker program is a cross-campus program that works with about 5,000 students a year from all different disciplines: nursing, business, engineering, science, philosophy. But DifferenceMaker is a program about raising awareness. It's really meant to get our first-generation students, many of them who are there to get that professional degree and land a big job, get them to start thinking that entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial action, entrepreneurial thinking has a place in their lives. DifferenceMaker introduces skills. I would say it doesn't really launch businesses. We do give them some seed funding that helps them to get started, but it's really meant on bringing them to the point where they get excited about forming a company. We also have a tech transfer office, technology commercialization, and a new venture initiative, which is focused on the early stage licensing, but also nurturing those licenses, those faculty, through a point where we start to scaffold resources around them. And resources may be people. The researcher probably isn't the best person to run the company, so we can perhaps find a CEO or an entrepreneurial CEO or transitional CEO. Maybe they need some seed funding to get some data or to do some benchmark testing. So we've created some resources that we can scaffold around. And this team, New Ventures and OTC, work together to scaffold those resources to move that IP, that university IP, a little bit forward down the pipeline. And then when I think about launching products and ventures, I think about some of the spaces and programs we've created out there. So I was involved in the creation of M2D2, the Massachusetts Medical Device Development Center, back in 2007. It's an incubator for medical device companies. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then after we filled that, suddenly we realized there are other kinds of startups that needed different types of facilities. So working with my good friend Tom O'Donnell here, we built out the Innovation Hub, which is a 10,000 square foot facility in Lowell, which has now been expanded to another mill town up the road in Haverhill. So these are spaces where serious entrepreneurs are gathering and launching their companies. There are incubator programs, there are accelerator programs in there, there are prototype labs, there are shared wet labs, cell culture labs, all sorts of resources that they need. And there's also investment money coming into them. So those are the resources the university has bundled to drive this. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the impact and what we've learned from partners outside. So again, I mentioned earlier the need to collaborate and to partner with people. And sometimes we tend to get very protective of our spaces and our way of doing things. I know I do. I can't speak for everyone. But forcing yourself to go to that meeting down in Cambridge or go to someone else's event and learn about what they're doing and then reflecting a bit on how you might be able to work with that is really important. Certainly, I'll talk about E4All first, because I remember back in 2011, 2012, when E4All, which is a Deshpande Foundation program that's focused on encouraging the citizens in our post-industrial cities that are really facing economic challenges. They create structures and accelerator program that encourages them to launch their own business and is very successful at it. And I remember when they first came to town, they were doing a campus program, Campus Catalyst, and they were giving the students prizes that were anywhere from $250 to, say, $500. And back then I was a business school prof, and I was talking with my dean, and we were like, wow, what can a team do with $250? I don't know. They can't launch a business. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to go to that event. And I went to that first event, and there were 4 different colleges at it. And I spent about an hour walking around each table and talking to the students. I said, so tell me, what did you do with your money? And one team said, well, we used the money to buy some poster board and some staples and such, and then we used it to buy coffee for the event to get people there, and then we used it to pay for transportation to get some senior citizens to participate. And then I went to another group, and they had found ways. So I learned something, right? I took some time, I went around, I talked to the people, and suddenly I walked away from there understanding, wow, we don't have to make $10,000, $15,000, $5,000 investments in the beginning, not to light the spark, right? It's small investments, recognitions, and rewards that would encourage people. So we've learned a lot. Tom and I are on the leadership team for E4All on the board, and we work very closely with that group. Mass Challenge is one of the largest accelerator programs in the world. We've been fortunate to have some of our DifferenceMaker teams move in there. The Lowell Plan. The Lowell Plan is an organization in the city of Lowell that's made up of bankers and the leading industrialists in the city. And they've been around for a very long time. They helped pull the city out of the sort of post-industrial slump when Wang and Deck left the region. But about a year ago, they've been watching what we've been doing with the Innovation Hub and with M2D2, and they came to us. They said, Steve, we have a loan program that we give to retail businesses so they can fix up the front of their businesses. We'd like to create a loan program for the companies, the startups that you're working for. And the model that they put together, they went to the banks. Within a week, they'd raised $1 million. Each of the banks contributed to it. And the model is any of the companies coming out of our incubators can receive up to a $100,000 loan at 3% interest for 10 years, no payments the first year, if they commit to stay in Lowell when they move out. And so suddenly, we've created some facility resources, some knowledge resources, but we didn't have $1 million. Our partners came to us and they said, we're going to raise that money. So the good work that you do is recognized by other people, and other people will come to you with opportunities. And now part of it is listening to them and being flexible, but it's really been a great boost for our ecosystem. I do want to mention DifferenceMaker. I'm really proud of this program, which we started in 2012. And in fact, the formulation of this program, it's a student-focused program. The formulation of this program was based on a few different things. Partially my experience as a business professor, where I was frustrated by the fact that our business students couldn't do anything fun until they were juniors or seniors, right? We use a developmental model in education where we force students to take accounting and finance and operation systems and marketing and organizational behavior and psychology, and I could go on and on, for 2 years before we let them go do a co-op or work on a capstone project. I wanted my students to get excited. I had so many students coming to me, they didn't understand why they needed to take a finance course or why they needed to take operation information systems. So one of the premises behind DifferenceMaker is let students work on problems that they want to work on. Let them work on them as freshmen. And it's primarily extracurricular. There is a curricular component, but it's primarily extracurricular. And as they start to encounter roadblocks and challenges, they will ask for information. They will ask for solutions. And there's your just-in-time opportunity to provide them information on a balance sheet, but to provide them information on opportunity assessment. So that's one of the premises. The other premise was watching our students and their families go through the recession of 2007 and 2008. When I was teaching, 50% of our students are still first generation. We have a low median income, so our retention rates are lower than some of the wonderful private schools in the Boston area because we're working with kids whose families just don't have enough money to get them through school. So 80% of our students work while they're working on their degree. And watching the challenges they and their families faced during the recession got us to thinking about creating a mindset in them for how to reinvent yourself when you face adversity. So that entrepreneurial mindset is an important part of the philosophy behind the DifferenceMaker program. How do you tackle problems? How do you gather resources? How do you move yourself forward when things don't work out the way you'd like them to? We want them to develop sustainable solutions. We have a wonderful service learning program. Every engineering student does service learning. The problem with service learning is after the semester ends, the project ends. And so someone does some great work in a community or with a student with a disability, and then they leave. And so with DifferenceMaker, we work with students to create a sustainable program. And so we get them to think about, well, how will you fund this? How will you recruit people? How will you build a team when you graduate? How will it grow? So it's been a wonderful program, and I'll talk a little bit about its impact as I close. I mentioned earlier our medical device incubator and our innovation hub. And again, these were programs that evolved. When M2D2 first started, it was a grant program where we had some funding to help medical device inventors get through that valley of death where they had a concept, they didn't have a prototype. In order to raise money, they needed a prototype. So we could grant them small amounts of money to work with the university to build the prototype. But very quickly we realized they needed much more than the development of a prototype, right? They needed business planning, opportunity assessment, clinical regulatory guidelines, and we needed space. So we created our first facility, 14,000 square feet. Jackie Maloney vouched for us because we had limited funding. She fronted money so we could hire a staff person. And while the skeptics thought we were crazy, within 6 months we had filled the facility and were looking for more space. And so as we branched out, we created another facility. This time we used a shared wet lab model. So instead of having private labs that get locked up, and a wet lab is a very valuable piece of equipment, you don't want to see it empty. And if you dedicate a wet lab to a particular company or to a particular researcher, it's quite possible that you won't see 50% utilization. So we've created a shared wet lab in the new model. We have 48 benches in a big room, about 3,000 square feet. There are 4 little hood rooms on one side. There are 2 cell culture labs in another. We purchase shared equipment. And the researchers come in there, they pay for a bench, and then they reserve those facilities as they need them. So suddenly we've moved from 50% to about 85, 90% utilization of the equipment. The companies in M2D2 have raised about $120 million in private investment funding, and we're generating about $860,000 in revenue, gross revenue, operating revenue for the facility. My job, and the reason the Chancellor put me on this project, my job was to build out the business model. And so that's one of the things I have to do is keep track of how we pay our expenses. As I mentioned, the success of M2D2 led to the development of the Innovation Hub. And we built that out in Lowell. We had non-medical device companies coming to us. They needed a space. They needed programming. And so I remember walking into Secretary for Economic Development, Greg Bielecki's office one day with a plan. And we really wanted $6 million. We could get about 4 from the Mass Life Science Center. So we went up there, we did a proposal, and I walked in there and with the Chancellor, and we said, so, Secretary, great to see you. I think if we win this $4 million, we could do this other project, but we need $2 million more. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, I can give you $1 million if you win the 4. So he said, all right, we'll make it work. So we had funding to build out these 2 facilities, and that program has been very successful. We've got 35 startups in there generating about $420,000 in operating revenue. And it's also become attractive to companies that want to create an off-site skunk works, where they can put someone in the vicinity of campus and work on developing startups, and they can also mine some of the new startups for opportunities. All of these facilities have resources, so the resources at the Innovation Hub is a prototype lab with laser cutter, 3D printer, and this helps attract people into the facility. I mentioned the importance of strong corporate partnerships, and I think I kind of cross over a bit when we talk about research, and this is just an example of some of the companies that we've partnered with. I think what's important is our ability to develop a flexible model. So we have this preferred partnership model, but there's a lot of flexibility in there. The other thing I think that's brought us closer to companies is the formulation of a formal co-op program. About 6 years ago, we established a co-op program modeled on Northeastern universities. We now have the 2nd largest co-op program in New England, and our students will spend 6 months in a company, and the companies love our students. I refer to them as bootstrap students. They're used to not having a lot of resources, so they can bootstrap themselves and they work hard, and they're very appreciative of the opportunities that are given them. Companies will often hire them or bring them back for a second co-op. And then the workforce development activities. And it's interesting, it's interesting how life works. I was in continuing ed when I started my career. I went out, I ended up in the business school, I was overseeing economic development, and now continuing ed is part of my portfolio as vice provost, so I'll have an opportunity to influence that. We have a very robust continuing and professional education program. They offer, they don't offer degrees directly. In some respects, they're a service unit to the academic side of the house. So we offer a number of fully online graduate education degrees. We have undergraduate and graduate information technology and business degrees. We have some engineering technology degrees. We have a number of degree programs that are entirely online at the undergraduate and graduate level. We also have certificate programs, and we'll actually build custom certificates for companies. So I'm doing some work right now with the Natick Research Soldier Lab in Natick, Massachusetts, where we're going to develop a customized certificate, graduate business certificate, that'll meet the needs of their employees and help them move up the promotional ladder. So that's been a really important program for us. Massachusetts has several very strong tech clusters, so certainly life science cluster, cybersecurity cluster, an emerging manufacturing cluster. So these are places, these are areas, clusters that play to our sweet spot. So we're looking at how do we leverage these education programs to meet the needs of the workforce. I've talked about professional co-op. I'll talk about the research and community co-ops. So these are a slightly different beast. And one of the things we've done, so we've grown significantly, but at the same time we've increased our standards. The truth is, I probably wouldn't get admitted to UMass Lowell now. I was admitted in 1976, but my SATs and GPA probably would not get me in. While we've increased the rankings, while we've increased the enrollments and the number of students, we've also become much more selective. The SAT scores have gone up about 75 points. The GPA is up. I think the average GPA is up around 3.5, 3.6 right now. And because of the dynamics in the private college market, more people want to come to our university because the state university for in-state tuition is still less expensive. So the quality of the experience has improved, quality of the students has improved, and we've been able to hold the price point somewhat. So it's become very attractive. In order to attract some of those best students, we created research co-ops, which gives, if a student has a certain high school GPA, they're offered a research co-op. So they get a partial scholarship for their 4 years at the university. They also receive $4,000 that can be used to pay them to work in a researcher's lab. So this is going back to that idea of exposing students very early in their career to the fun parts of the job, right? The fun parts of the education, why they really want to be there. So freshmen are given $4,000 in that summer between freshman and sophomore year. They are paid to work in somebody's lab, or they're paid to work in an incubator, or they're paid to work in a startup. So it's a great opportunity for them. They get to try out the field where they're going. And some of those kids are really gifted and talented and end up getting hired on. And then we also have community co-ops where we're doing something similar to place students in nonprofit organizations. So Lowell has it has a food pantry, it has housing shelters. There are a lot of nonprofits in the area, and so we have students that want to work in those organizations, and so we're helping to support that. And that's how you give back to the community and how you connect your institution to that community. So just a little snapshot of some of the impacts. So we've been recognized by the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities and an Innovation and Economic Prosperity University based on some of this work. I'm happy to say we received the Deshpande Symposium Award for Excellence in Student Engagement due to the work with DifferenceMaker. Payscale.com ranked us as one of the top 10 institutions, public institutions in the United States for return on investment. And I don't know about in India, but certainly in the United States, we're hearing lots of noise about the value of a college degree. And so we have external groups that are validating the value of the degree they get at our university. That blue box captures the DifferenceMaker program. So over the last, 5 years, we've worked with about 25,000 students in varying capacities. We start with a great big funnel, 5,000 students a year, and as we work them through the course of the year down that funnel, we'll end up working with 200 students, and then when we get to the big idea challenge in April, we're working with about 100 students. And out of those 100 students, most of those teams will get anywhere between $1,000 and $8,000 in funding, and move into a boot camp program where we start to work on further skills development to move them along. Those students have, they have 7 patents filed. There have been 63 teams. We've handed about $465,000 in funding to the students. And those teams have actually gone out and raised about over $500,000 in funding. And so these are just our student teams. So that program's worked out really well. And the medical device incubator, when we did that economic impact study, that program alone generated about $75 million of economic impact based on the wages the startups were paying and the money that was invested into them, which allows them to spend money within the supply chain in terms of growing their products. And then we don't get many of these, but when we do get them, we like to celebrate them. So a big drive in tech transfer offices has been to license technologies because they're going to lead to a big payoff. Well, the truth is those payoffs are few and far between. Our experiences are about every 10 years. But this was a good one. We had a technology developed by a couple of researchers that is basically a Botox-like cream that was brought into a startup. We retained an equity position in that startup. And when they sold the startup to Allergan for $90 million, the university received a check for about $3.5 million, which went to the bottom line. It helped to pay for some construction projects we were working on. We reinvested some of it. And then there will be a continual cash stream if the product actually makes it out to the market. So we like to share those once in a while. So that's sort of a snapshot of what we're doing at University of Massachusetts Lowell in terms of sort of building out the ecosystem and some of the different programs and how we sort of think about the strategic planning process and how it relates to the things that we're doing on an ongoing basis. And so with that, I'll stop. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And I'm honored to be asked to speak, and thank you very much. I'll also thank you all for returning today.
Hi. You mentioned about this new venture initiative with this technology transfer offices. So you have different mechanism to deal with IP spin-off for startups vis-a-vis industry, or how does it work?
How does that work?
Yep.
So the tech transfer office is focused primarily on licensing university technologies. The new venture initiative, which works with the tech transfer office, also works with external partners. In fact, we use the term university affiliated. So it does not have to be university IP, but it could be like those companies that we have. We have about 60 companies in our incubators, for example. Most of those companies are companies that we have attracted to Lowell. They're not companies based on university IP. They're companies that have moved into our incubator because they want a relationship with the university. They want access to the equipment. So the New Venture Initiative is the group that we created to work with those university-affiliated companies. And what they can offer them is they'll help them, they'll meet with them, they'll talk with them, they'll help them figure out what kinds of resources they need. So do they need a CEO? Do they need access to technical staff? Do they need access to research facilities? And they do some matchmaking, and we use the term scaffolding. So what they do is they'll scaffold those resources around those university affiliated companies. We created a vehicle so that we could also invest in those companies to gain an equity share. So the other thing, so the New Venture Initiative, they manage that Lowell Plan loan program. They also manage the Riverhawk New Venture Fund, which is a fund that we created where our alumni donate $50,000 to the university. It goes into a pool, and then we, twice a year, we'll put a mix of 3 to 6 university-affiliated startups in front of that group. They make some recommendations on investment, and then we can make a $50,000 investment into that company, and we use a convertible note because it's difficult to value them at the early stage. But then we're actually able to leverage an equity position in these. So we make an upfront investment in people and resources. Then, if it's a good opportunity, we'll make a cash investment in them to gain some equity, and that's where we hope to see some return.
So that brings me another question, if I'm not stopping anyone here from asking. Does university has any policy of preferential approach towards technology commercialization for entrepreneurship?
Does the university have a...
Yep.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Just this summer, we started a program. So we have a lot of people reaching out for us for assistance, but just this summer, we started a program called, what do we call it? Startup Team Triage. And in Startup Team Triage, we picked 10 opportunities. And so I had, Tom O'Donnell's one of my directors. I had all 5 directors at the table, so Tech Transfer, DifferenceMaker, New Venture Initiative, and M2D2 and Innovation Hub. And what we did is we picked 10 opportunities, and there was a mix. So we picked 4 early stage university projects. We picked 2 university-affiliated companies in the incubator. We picked 2 student companies, and then we picked 2 university spin-offs. So from that perspective, there was some preferential treatment, for, particularly around that early stage resource. And what this group does is they meet monthly, and all we talk about are those 10 opportunities. And we talk about what those 5 directors and the resources under their management, how those resources can be directed to accelerating the progress of those technologies. Alternatively, we may also cut off resources. At some point, if we see that a researcher is going in a different direction, isn't really interested in the commercialization path, we'll say, okay, great, good luck with that, but we're going to reinvest our resources. So in that respect, they do get some preferential treatment.
Very good to hear you. I just want to check with you, is the Merrimack Sandbox part of UMass Lowell, or it's a separate thing?
Is which?
The Sandbox.
The Sandbox.
Sandbox.
Yep,
Yeah.
so the Sandbox, which is now E4All, is a separate program. It's an independent run by the Deshpande Foundation. They have headquarters in the Wanalancet Mill in Lowell, and they're actually growing. They're growing their model to other sort of post-industrial cities in New England, in Massachusetts and other parts of the country. But we do, it's sort of a pipeline for us. So, for example, our DifferenceMaker students, we strongly encourage them, the ones that move through our pipeline, we'll strongly encourage them to participate in E4All. And we've had several teams do that, and one of those teams went from DifferenceMaker to E4All to Mass Challenge. And it's very difficult. I think Mass Challenge has, they have 10,000 applications for 100 slots or something, 1,000. But we had 2 teams in it, so we work closely with them.
Yes, I think that's very important. Yeah.
It is very important, absolutely.
Yeah, could you elaborate on your corporate involvement in the incubation hub that you have? Are these like you get them to become members, or are they one-off involvement, and what do they contribute to the hub?
Sure.
Vis-a-vis what do they expect to get back?
So this is in regard to the corporate partners. So I'd say there were two models. One is a straight sponsorship model. And M2D2 has been very successful. They generate about $250,000 a year or so in corporate sponsorships. Johnson & Johnson has a series of 7 innovation labs across North America, and they made M2D2 in Lowell one of those innovation labs. And the reason they do it is they're looking for pipeline. They want to snatch up those early stage life science companies. And so we have Boston Scientific, Johnson & Johnson, Amgen just signed on as a sponsorship. And what we do, we use that funding to have big events. So we have a new venture competition, which is up to a $200,000 in prizes and services now. So that's something that attracts people from all over North America and even from other parts of the world. And the goal is that they get to pitch in front of these corporate partners, as well as there's a growing number of angel groups now that are coming into our facility regularly to see them. So that's the attraction for the corporations. And the other piece is the Skunk Works model, and Tom sort of pioneered that, where we have a company, Instrumentation Lab, about a 750 person company. They have 2 lines of medical devices that they manufacture. And these 2 lines of products are probably 25, 30 years old. And what they need to do is branch out into other areas, but they can't do it it's been very difficult for them to do it within the facility. So they reached out to Tom to actually take some space in the Innovation Hub where they could start to connect with researchers and other kinds of companies and look at how their core competencies could be used in other product lines and other sectors. So there's a sponsorship model, but there's also a more direct engaging with the researchers and the companies.
Steve, you've got a very impressive array of programs, from small business development to leveraging high-tech advanced innovations in growth companies. Have you seen any crossover? You know, as you see small businesses kind of adopt new technologies, have you seen those two communities start to converge in any way? Just curious.
You know, it's interesting. The one I think of is a student company. I'm thinking of Invisaware. So we had a student company, 2 engineering students who, and at one time there were more, and their initial idea was to develop an attachment to jewelry that could be used as an emergency alert. So rather than carrying a separate emergency alert system, women could just put a pendant on their bracelet or their necklace. They had this idea, and there are other companies doing that, and I tell people, just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean you can't be successful. It's just doing it the right way. So what happened is they had this technology, they started to do some work, they went through E4All, they went through Mass Challenge, and what I found is they really caught the attention of the small business community in Lowell. And so the Lowell plan, for example, they were snapping. When are you going to give? They wanted us to give them the loan. They said, when are you going to give them a loan? They're great, because they do a great pitch. We kept saying, well, they're not quite ready yet. They're not. We'll let you know when they're ready. They're ready now. But what happened is they ended up partnering with a local business, a local electronics manufacturer. He's going to manufacture their product. He's actually given them space, so they now have an office. So it was sort of a nice opportunity where a student technology-based concept and company is now making a very solid relationship in the community with the small businesses, and that's probably the most direct one that I've seen. So, thank you.
Can I ask Desh to just come over and hand, instead of a bouquet, a book?
Great, Desh, thank you very much. Excellent, that's wonderful. I have something to read home on the plane. Excellent.